Hello, I'm Ian Abdallah,
I'm Tyler Morrison.
I'm Cesar Herrera.
And I'm Lucas Trazes.
and this is a documentary on women in aviation. One of the most, if not the most, prominent figure in women aviation is Amelia Earhart. Amelia Earhart had a dream to fly and developed this at a very, very young age. Some people thought she was crazy and out of her mind. She didn't care what the people thought of her, and she followed that dream. Amelia Mary Earhart was born in Atchison, Kansas, in her grandfather's home. She always loved the idea of adventure. As she grew older and older, the desire to adventure grew and grew. She was homeschooled for most of her life until she was enrolled in a public school in her 7th grade. She first saw an airplane around when she was 12, and thus her love for flying took off. She decided she would learn more about aviation and airplanes. Later in her life, Earhart and one of her friends visited an airfield and watched a pilot from the ground. The pilot spotted Amelia and her friend from above and dived at them. She was fascinated with the flying machine and how it soared through the air. This was her first experience with airplanes, and it wouldn't be her last.
In 1919, Amelia Earhart entered the College of Columbia University. She had quit a year later to be with her parents. When Amelia was in California with her parents, her father took her to an airfield to fly in a plane with a later famed air racer. This ride changed Amelia Earhart's life forever. After this experience, Amelia was determined to be a pilot and fly. She got multiple jobs and saved up the money to go to flying lessons. Her instructor was Anita Snook, who was a female aviator. Amelia was very dedicated to her training. 6 months later, she purchased a yellow plane called the Canary. In 1922, Earhart flew an altitude of 14,000 feet, setting a world record for females. On May 1923, she became the 16th woman to earn her piloting license. After Charles Lindbergh's solo flight across the Atlantic Ocean, Amy Guest showed interest in being the first woman to fly the Atlantic Ocean. After saying that the flight was too dangerous for her to take, she offered to pay for and support the flight. While at work on April 1928, Amelia Earhart got a call from Hilton H. Rayleigh and asked her, "Would you like to fly across the Atlantic?" Of course, Amelia said yes to this offer. When the flight took place, she was accompanied by Wilmer Stoltz and Lewis Gordon on the flight. Since Earhart had no training for this type of flying, she did not pilot the aircraft. After the flight, Earhart was asked questions on the flight, and to sum it up, she basically said, "I just sat there. I was just baggage. Maybe I'll try it out solo one day." Earhart did in fact do her transatlantic solo flight, including many others, but the most dangerous flight was the flight around the world. And if completed, this would indeed make Amelia Earhart an aviator to remember. On June 1st, 1937, Amelia Earhart, accompanied by Fred Noonan, would start the flight around the world. She took off from Oakland, California. When they reached Leh, they had already flown over 22,000 miles. They had 7,000 more miles to go before reaching Oakland. Earhart and Noonan departed from Leh for tiny Howland Island, their next refueling stop. She and Noonan lost radio contact with the U.S. Guard and anchored off to the coast of Howland Island and disappeared on that flight.
Bessie Coleman was the first ever African American woman to earn a pilot's license. Her impact was tremendous. She was an important part of American aviation and was an idol for women and for the African American community. She can be related to other great women who contributed to aviation, like Amelia Earhart or Harriet Quimby. Bessie Coleman was born on January 26, 1892 in Atlanta, Texas, where her family worked as sharecroppers. Although Atlanta was full of prosperity, it was predominantly dominated by white individuals, leaving little for the Colemans. This caused George Coleman to take his family to Waxahachie, Texas, to find better opportunities for him and his family. He bought a quarter-acre of land in Mustang Creek, where he built a 3-room house for his family. There, his family took on a role of cotton pickers, where Bessie and her siblings worked as soon as they could. Not everything went well for the Colemans. Her father, George Coleman, left due to racial tensions and economic drawbacks. George Coleman was part Native American, so he went to Oklahoma in search of better opportunities. Bessie's mother, Susan Coleman, refused to go with him, During this event, two of the older sons left in search of their own opportunities. Bessie's mother worked all day and night to provide for Bessie and her siblings. At age 6, Bessie walked 4 miles to Waxahachie's segregated school. She went almost every day, excluding Saturday, which was dedicated to family and church. Bessie excelled in school due to her intelligence and perseverance. This was especially prevalent in her math skills, which were thought to be too difficult for women or for those of the colored. Although Susan Coleman worked hard, the Colemans were in huge financial crisis. At the time, Bessie had 3 younger siblings, of which she was a second mother to. Susan found work as a cook and a housekeeper, while Bessie, only 9 at the time, managed all the maintenance and cooking at the Coleman household. After the Civil War, universities and colleges for the colored were created, of which the Colored Agriculture and Normal University in Langston, Oklahoma, piqued her eye. In 1910, at the age of 18, Bessie worked as a laundromat and used her collective savings to enroll at said university. Unfortunately, Bessie had to drop out due to lack of tuition. Because of her lack of tuition, she went back to her family in Waxahachie, Texas to be a laundromat. In 1915, Bessie moved to Chicago with her 2 older brothers. There, Bessie went to a beautician school where she became a manicurist, and she made a steady income there. Very shortly after Bessie came to Chicago, her and her sisters followed. Due to World War I, both her brothers were drafted to France. Due to the plane's glorification in World War I, it piqued Bessie's eye and she applied to a flight school. Sadly, she was denied due to her race and gender, though not all was lost for Bessie. When her 2 brothers returned from the war, they spoke of women in France being able to fly. In 1919, Bessie contacted millionaire journalist Robert Abbott, and he helped her secure a visa for France. In France, Bessie attended a 10-month-long flight course at École d'Aviation des France Cadron in the Somme region. On 1921, Bessie completed her course and was the first ever African American woman to earn a pilot's license. She stayed and attended 3 more months of pilot training before finally returning home. On September 16, 1921, Bessie returned home and was surprised to be the focus of the media. She returned to France on February 28, 1922, to learn how to perform acrobatic flying. She also visited factories in Germany to better understand how planes worked.
She returned to New York, and Coleman performed her first air show on September 3, 1922, at Curtiss Field near New York. She was in a plane borrowed by Glenn Curtiss. She was checked out and standing in front of the crowd. Bessie Coleman, by name of Elizabeth Coleman, born on January 26, 1893, Atlanta, Texas, U.S., died April 30, 1926, Jacksonville, Florida. Her plane engine suddenly stopped working and she crashed. She was badly hurt in her accident and she suffered a broken leg, a few cracked ribs, and cuts on her face. Amelia Earhart and Bessie Coleman didn't just stop at this. They went above and beyond. Amelia Earhart founded the 99th organization. This is an organization based on women aviation. This organization is thriving today. It is gaining multiple members every year. These are links to a couple of sources and a link to the 99's website.
These are our primary sources that we used. These are our secondary sources. These are the secondary sources continued. And these are secondary sources continued even further. Thank you for listening to our documentary.